Good afternoon and a hearty welcome to Congregation Nishmat Am's Adult Education Premier Speaker Series of 2022. My name is Yitzchak Cohen. I'm the very proud rabbi of this wonderful congregation. Today, we will be privileged to hear and take part in this first lecture in this provocative and engaging series featuring scholars from around the world on topics that are relevant to our Jewish community. Today, we're privileged to have as our guest speakers and lecturers Dr. Alan Rosen, who will join us from the holy city of Yerushalayim in Israel, of course, and our own Dr. David Patterson. A topic, the enduring legacy of Elie Wiesel, And they will lead a discussion and talk about the extensive archives of Elie Wiesel's lectures at the 92nd Street Y in New York. They will explore the legacy of those lectures as a treasure for our Jewish people for generations to come. Dr. David Patterson is a person who needs no introduction whatsoever. He holds the Hillel A. Feinberg Distinguished Chair in Holocaust Studies at the Ackerman Center for the Holocaust Studies, University of Texas in Dallas, and is a senior research fellow for the Institute of Study of Global Antisemitism and Policy. He is the winner of the National Jewish Book Award, the Koret Jewish Book Award, and the Holocaust Scholars Conference Eternal Flame Award. He has published 40 books and more than 250 essays and articles and book chapters on topics in literature, philosophy, the Holocaust, and Jewish studies. Above all, he is the most phenomenal mensch I know, and we're so fortunate and privileged to have him here in Dallas, Texas, and as a member of our congregation, a member of the board, and a wonderful friend, a very loyal friend. I'll ask Dr. Patterson to introduce Dr. Rosen, and a hearty welcome to Dr. Rosen, certainly. And we are looking forward to a phenomenal hour. Please direct all your questions and comments to Dr. David Patterson's in the chat room. Without further ado, as we say, Dr. David Patterson, God bless you.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I'll say just a few words about my cherished friend, Avraham Rosen, Alan Rosen. I've been blessed to learn with Dr. Rosen and learn from Dr. Rosen. He is a renowned author and teacher. He studied with Professor Elie Wiesel at Boston University, where he was graduate assistant to Professor Wiesel. Alan has won numerous awards. He's the Susan Herman Award for Leadership in Holocaust and Genocide Awareness from Kane State. More recently, his book, The Holocaust Jewish Calendars, which is a remarkable volume, was awarded the Yad Vashem Prize. He's taught at universities, colleges, yeshivas, seminaries in Israel and the United States. He lectures regularly at Yad Vashem, and he currently serves as the project director and the scholar for the Elie Wiesel Living Archive at the 92nd Street Y. He has a recent volume that contains the texts that are based on those lectures. It's called Surrounded by Fire and Light, just came out. And a kind of companion to that volume is a book that I was blessed to just have published called Portraits, the Hasidic Legacy of Elie Wiesel. So let's go to it. What should we talk about? We have so much. Alan, I have things, but I'd like to hear you have some.
We always have things. We always have, thank God, much to say. And first of all, thanks to the hosts, and including Rabbi Cohen and to Mr. Siegel for their kind help to get us off the ground here and have us transverse continents. In talking about Professor Wiesel's legacy, it's a Torah legacy that we're talking about. Both David, Patterson, and I are, I think, in agreement and collaboration to be able to bring to the surface in a revealed, unmistakable way Elie Wiesel as a Torah scholar of the first rank. To many, this is not their associations when they think of Elie Wiesel, who was so indefatigable as a champion of Holocaust, chronicling Holocaust memory, that's what he is associated with by most of the world. So, but David and I, we don't give up easily. And we see before us really a necessary challenge that we hope to meet to bring these phenomenal Torah shiurim, these study sessions, into the focus of Jews the world over. David Patterson has done this so wonderfully with his book on portraits, which is his approach, because it was Elie Wiesel's approach to his Torah studies. And maybe, David, you can then say, what is that title? Why should that title be there? What do we need to know about that?
Well, yes, portraits. Portraits is a term that Professor Wiesel himself used. Portraits are about not just the teaching, but the teacher. The Torah is a living teaching, living testimony, a living tradition placed in our care. And to learn Torah is to learn from our teachers, and including our teacher, Professor Elie Wiesel. This is really central to his Hasidic thinking. He always identified himself as a Vishnitzer Hasid. And in my view, as I've said to you, Alan, before, I certainly as exemplified by Elie Wiesel, Hasidism is not a branch of Judaism. It's the essence of Judaism in many ways. And it's about song, it's about memory, it's about Messiah. And if I could share just a very powerful passage from Professor Wiesel's book, Open Heart, where he gives us a key to his writings. And there he recalls the tale of a survivor, a Hasidic rabbi, who was very reluctant to speak of his time over there, so to say. And when he finally agreed to say something about what happened to him, instead of telling a story, he began singing the nigun, the melody of Ani Ma'ami, which was, if you ever heard Professor Wiesel sing Ani Ma'amin, I believe in the coming of the Messiah, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, even if he should tarry, nevertheless, every day I shall await his coming, right? Not just await, it's achake, I shall expect his coming. So the rabbi survivor began singing this song, and in open heart, Professor Wiesel writes, the most beautiful, most moving nigun I had ever heard. He added nothing. For him, the song said it all. Shall I, he asked, Professor Wiesel asked, shall I be able to sing up? Shall I too be able to intone this nigun that contains all that I have tried to express in my writings? What a statement. This ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema im kol zeh achake, with, I believe with complete faith, and in spite of everything, I shall anticipate, expect, work for, await the coming of the Messiah. So if that's the key to Professor Wiesel's writings, the key to his writings is a millennial Jewish tradition of Torah and Talmud and Midrash and mystical traditions, Hasidism. That's the key. That's what he's about. And as Alan said, I think to preserve his legacy is to preserve this key as he identifies it to his writings.
Absolutely, David. And I think what goes along with that in your Hasidic emphasis is not only what he studied, which, as you say, was Torah Nigla and Torah Nister, as we say, meaning the revealed Torah and the secrets of the Torah, which he did in a concentrated way for years, and felt called upon, summoned to share that, to, in his word, to transmit. And I think along with that, though, is the idea that the study is a preeminent, joyful activity. Anyone who, like us, had the privilege of being with him, to study with him, knew what that joy was. And that comes across as well in the fact that in the original French editions of his publishing these Torah lectures, each and every book is entitled Celebration. Celebration of Hasidism, celebration of the Bible, celebration of the Talmud, celebration of the prophets, and as he said, each and every volume in English as well, some of which were direct translations, some of which were reworking of the lectures. Each one of those was part of that celebration agenda. So to preserve that legacy, to continue that legacy, is to preserve that celebration.
Yes.
Undoubtedly. Yes,
Yes.
David, go ahead.
Yes, that's the celebration, rejoicing, gratitude, very important to our teacher. It's gratitude. Indeed, a Yehudi, a Jew, is one who is grateful. That's what the word means. Right? Professor Wiesel once wrote that for a Jew and for Judaism, despair is blasphemy. And yet we look at our history, we look at Professor Wiesel's life, you might wonder, well, there may be something to despair about here, but he refused to despair. And as the Hasidic masters tell us, that it's precisely when we don't see what there is to be grateful for that our gratitude must run deepest. It's a gratitude for being summoned and for being called to engage with the Holy One. And as you say, the legacy is not just something that a teaching that we receive. It's a summons that calls us out, that singles us out by name. And it reminds me, of the passage in your volume, Alan, of the collection of the lectures from 92nd Street Y. And by the way, many in the Nishmat Am congregation know at least 4 of those very well, because we did a series of those lectures, each one more powerful than the other. But the passage that the title came from, it's in the chapter on Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, 2 of the great masters of the Talmud. And it opens with the recurring refrain from the Talmud, Tashma, listen carefully, heed. Tashma, come closer and listen. Listen to tales and legends about ancient teachers and their immortal teachings. Listen to their words filled with fire and light. Words they have received and transmitted across centuries of exile and longing. Only if you listen well will you understand them and yourself. Part of the legacy of our teacher, a storyteller, and receiving that legacy entails coming to know who we are ourselves. Like any great teacher, he leads us to realize who we are as Jews, as human beings, as one who is singled out and summoned, one who is asked, as the first human being asked, where are you? All of this is in the legacy. The legacy is a calling, as I said, and not just a text or a script. It's the legacy. When we come to the legacy, we come answering the tashma. Come and listen carefully.
And he was a great listener.
Oh.
Great listener. And that he would teach us, his students, how to listen. Every class at Boston University that I had the privilege to attend for 10 years was begun with two students giving a presentation. And he would sit and listen and take notes, open the class to questions, comments, and only then would he speak. And it was clear, at least to those of us who were ready to watch, and probably most were, that he was modeling how to listen, how to convey appreciation for what someone would say and reflect and communicate, and the preciousness of the words that were there. And so that listening was and is immense. So Tashma was a how can we say, an ethical lesson, as well as a methodological one in the Talmud. Also with Ani Maamin, that you mentioned the 92nd Street Y living archive, the Elie Wiesel living archive at the 92nd Street Y, which is online. You can Google to find it. And in a month's time, it will have its launch in its expanded form, which we've been working on for, which I've had the privilege to work on for about now 9 months. And with that, one can go there. And 3 times, I believe, does Professor Wiesel sing the niggin, the melody, Ani Maamin, the Vizhnitzer melody, at the end of his presentations. One, for those that are interested in the 40th anniversary lecture called Come Celebrate, which you can find there. At the end, I think it's exactly at the hour mark, is when he sings. And he also tells the story, part of which David has shared with us wonderfully. But there's a second installment to that story that's not in Open Heart, that he forgot the melody after learning it from the nephew of the Vizhnitzer Rebbe. He forgot it. That was at a time he had gone through a lot, and even though his powers of recall were immense, as we know, that he did not. One year, I think he doesn't designate the time, but in the late 1970s, 1980s, he went to spend Passover in Florida with his childhood friend from Siyat, Moshe Chaim Berkovitz. And while they were at the Seder, Moshe Chaim, of blessed memory, turns to Professor Wiesel and says, "Do you remember that niggin?" And at that moment, Professor Wiesel remembered, and they both started singing what they hadn't heard for some 30 to 40 years before. So that the way that song, story is also woven into the very fabric of the teaching that Professor Wiesel does of the 92nd Street wide lectures. It's there. The singing is there because it had to be there every anniversary. It had to be there. And those go from 1967 to 2014, 47 years of yearly lecturing. And with that, it shows his dedication, diligence, joy, belief in Torah to reveal what is necessary to know. And it just should be said, when his study of Tanakh, of Bible, of Chazal, of Hasidism, it's all pivots on Midrash, on other Talmud passages. He mines directly from the tradition itself. And that's, I think, meant to also be a model for us, along with listening, along with singing, along with celebration. Don't you think?
Yes, yes. Professor Wiesel, as you indicated, knew how to listen because he listened with love. He listened with care and concern. When you were with him, you felt that you were the most important person in the universe. He was completely present. And in the passage I read from your volume, Alan, I mentioned, that listen to the tales and the legends. Professor Wiesel was a storyteller. Legacies are transmitted not by lectures, but by stories and storytelling, especially the legacy that Professor Wiesel entrusts to us. We have a teaching that says, if you would know the one who spoke and brought heaven and earth into being, learn the Agadah, the stories, the storytelling. The Zohar, a mystical text that Professor Wiesel referred to many times and knew very well, says that there are three levels of relationship among human beings. It's saying, speaking, and relating or telling. It's lemor, ledaber, and lehagid, from the Haggadah, the story that we read at Passover. It's the storytelling we're taught takes one soul to the deepest relation to another. It's a transmission of a soul that embodies the teaching. That's what a portrait is. That's the persona. So Professor Wiesel was a teacher who, as you say, had immense recall and immense learning, but also a profound love for his students, for his friends, certainly. And it reminds me of the story of Elijah and Elisha. I think Elijah's the first chapter in your book, when Elisha asks Elijah, his teacher, for a portion of his soul. Actually asked him for a double portion. Be that okay? But a teacher is like a father. The more and the hore. It has teacher, parent, Torah. They all have the same root in Hebrew. So in many ways, Professor Wiesel, those of us, Alan, you were immensely blessed. I don't have to tell you to spend those years as his student. I was immensely blessed to know him and spend hours in talking with him and listening to him. But a teacher gives birth to the soul, is the comparison that's sometimes made. Certainly breathes life into a soul, the soul of those who learn with him, and as his words, Professor Wiesel's words were indeed filled with fire, the fire of Torah, and the light of truth and learning and love. Chesed, the chesed of the chassid.
Yes. Maybe just we'll bring a few of his words to the first lecture, as David so kindly mentioned, from the book that I edited called Filled with Fire and Light, is a lecture that Professor Wiesel gave on the prophet Elisha in 1999. It's called Elisha, the full title is Elisha, the Perfect Disciple, and begins, the man is strange, elusive, complex, full of contradictions. Why is he so severe one day and so affectionate the next? Which principle governs his existence? A man of faith? Is he a carrier of hope or of punishment? Is he dominated by rage or by love? He astonishes us by his humanity as much as by his inflexibility. Can he be understood by us always? Does he understand himself? How is one to reconcile the kindness he shows a barren woman and the tenderness he demonstrates toward a lifeless boy with his apparent cruelty to other living children? Of course, he is a prophet, and prophets do not seek to be understood or admired. All they want is to be obeyed. They teach by example. They follow God's words. Why shouldn't people follow theirs? People rarely understand what a prophet expects of them, nor does he understand what God wants of him, but he remains obedient always. So that's end of that extraordinary passage there that begins this lecture with the litany of questions, which is one of Professor Wiesel's incisive way of coming to a text, be it a text in Tanakh, in Bible, in Talmud, in of the Hasidic masters. It's to this sense of driving questions that hopefully we'll be able to peel back layer and layer. He would always, and as one, this is open for anyone to see by going to the Y lectures, and here Professor Wiesel, question after question, searching for what it is that disturbs him. That's one of the characteristic phrases, disturbs, which does not mean that, okay, it disturbs me, so I'm going to go in the other direction. It's rather the opposite. It disturbs me, so that's why I'm going to go further and further. And then the other key word in this passage of the many words, to reconcile, to take what seems to stand in tension and opposition, and to be able to probe in such a way to be able to see how they come to coexist in what David Patterson has so nimbly showed us are these portraits. So don't you think that's representative in this way, David?
Absolutely, yes. And I'm glad you made reference to the question and the disturbance.
Yeah.
God, the Holy One is revealed in the disturbance of the witness. I would say not in the quietude, but it's a certain wholeness that comes precisely with the disturbance. A disturbance over the suffering of our neighbor, the disturbance that Job experiences, the questioning. Professor Wiesel was fond of pointing out that the Aleph Lama, the El, that is God, is in the midst of the She'el La, in the midst of the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's the question that sets us into motion. And as you say, it's a disturbance that is disturbing, not because it's something we have to run away from, but because it summons us, it calls us. It is asking us, where's your brother and what have you done? It draws forth from us as we see in the patriarchs and the prophets, the cry of Hineni, here I am for you.
Mm-hmm.
So there is what Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz once called a certain strife of the spirit, a certain confrontation and wrestling that goes with Yisrael, right? One who strives with God. That makes us who we are. Professor Wiesel once said that there comes a time when, in order to remain human, one must assume the Jewish condition. It's the Jewish condition is the human condition. It's a condition of being called and being disturbed, of raising questions, of wrestling. I mean, our word for prayer, tefillah, is related to naphtolin, which is wrestling. It's not supplication, it's confrontation. And Professor, I remember discussing prayer once with Professor Wiesel, and he describes his own prayers as a questioning and confrontation. But he added that, like Jacob, I mean, there are times when, in order to draw closer to God, you have to wrestle with God. You have to engage God. And not just accept, things as they are. I mean, if acceptance means indifference, then that's our downfall, right? And so I think this gives us a key to joy and gratitude, which define, if anything defines Hasidism, it's joy and gratitude. There's no approaching the Holy One without joy. We make a joyful noise unto the Lord, we're taught in the Psalms, Psalms 100. Come with thanksgiving. But it's a thanksgiving not for getting what we want, but being summoned to what we must do. It's a thanksgiving for meaning in spite of everything. It's a thanksgiving for the question. And I just say one more thing along this line of gratitude. Many Jews awaken each morning with the words on their lips, Modeh Ani, I give thanks before you. For returning my soul, for having Rabba Imunatecha, so great is your faith in me. Thank you for sending me on another mission. I'll try to do better this time. Thank you for returning my soul, for calling me forth. And I would say we owe Professor Wiesel a profound gratitude, not only for what he accomplished and for the great gift to humanity that his life was, but for calling us forth, the legacy that is a summons, I would say.
That we see that that summons, and his being a facilitator, maybe we could say, of each of us to hear that summons, that call, that it in the volume, this volume filled with fire and light, it's there front and center in the chapter, in the lecture on the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, which was a lecture that he gave at the 92nd Street Y in 1981, and that he gave again at Boston University, where he gave often a parallel set of lectures, or sometimes diverging, to bring some in one place that he did not present at the Y, but then present in BU, or vice versa. But he presented what is virtually the same lecture 19 years later at Boston University, but under very changed circumstances, because Professor Wiesel, as you've mentioned, David, was a chassid, truly.
Yes.
It's the first words of his first lecture at the 92nd Street Y. I am a chassid. And he was loyal to Vishnitz, which was the chassidus that his maternal grandfather, the Dodje Feg, was an esteemed member of. And he continued always to identify himself. But at the same time, he was close to numbers of other masters, all those that he wrote about, first of all, even some that he didn't write about. And that included the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And so when he gave the lecture on the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, in 1981, it was during the central years of the Lubavitcher Rebbe's great mission and teaching. And Professor Wiesel speaks of his visits to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, his learning from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, his being coaxed by the Lubavitcher Rebbe to marry, to have a family, which he didn't do until he was 40 years old.
Yeah.
And then when he gave the lecture again, it was in 2000. So some 6 years after the Lubavitcher Rebbe's passing, and he comments in different ways in each lecture. But in both lectures, what is front and center is the story of the Alter Rebbe in prison and being visited by the warden of the prison, who says, how can we understand the question that God asks after Adam and Eve have eaten from the forbidden fruit? And God comes into the garden and says, Ayeka, where are you? So the warden asks the rabbi, how could God ask such a question? God is omniscient. He knows everything. He knows what's hidden behind every corner of the universe. So he didn't know which bush, which tree Adam and Eve were hiding behind. And the Alter Rebbe says, you're a believer? He says, yes. He was not Jewish, but he was Christian, but a believer and a student of the Bible. He says, I'll tell you what it means. It means that the Almighty was asking Adam and Eve, where are you now that you've changed history forever? What does this mean in terms of where you stand in the days that you have been apportioned to live in this world? And then turns to the warden and says, and you're 46 years old. What have you done with your days? Have you done what you were sent to do? And in Professor Wiesel's searing retelling of that story, he ends it by saying, and the warden left the prison a changed man. Meaning the warden was not just a stage prop. The warden too was a human being who was cut to the quick, which means everyone in our world is asked that, what Professor Wiesel called primordial question, a question that invites us to be able to assume with all of our powers a search and a carrying out what the Almighty has slated for us to do. And that's clearly what each of these lectures has, if not explicitly, then between the lines, helping us, coaxing us, inviting us, steering us, paving the way for us to better assume the path we were meant to follow. Don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, every time I listen to you, Alan, I have a dozen or more thoughts that I want to share and open up. But I think maybe we should spend a few minutes inviting questions.
Absolutely.
Questions, comments. Daphne?
That would be great.
Have a hand raised.
I have no problems whatever with the idea of gratitude. Never have. But I do have a problem with the idea of believing with complete faith. I really always have. Does that make, and I sometimes feel that that makes me a bad Jew.
Well, no, I wouldn't say you're a bad Jew, or it's not complete faith that makes a good Jew. It's acts of loving kindness and learning and prayer, right? The three pillars. But I once heard a rabbi ask this question that you raised: how can anyone believe with complete faith? And his comment was, it's not an assertion, it's a request. May I believe with complete faith? And there's a wholeness with this emunah shlema, the cognitive shlema, shalom, right? Complete, whole. And we end the 18 benedictions, the Amida, with a prayer invoking the peace that can come only from God, right? So I think that if there's peace and there's wholeness, seems to me it lies in the not just the wait for the Messiah, but the working for the Messiah, the seeking the Messiah. Professor Wiesel once quoted one of the Hasidic masters who said, a Jew is someone whose fate is tied to the fate of the Messiah. So yeah, I mean, complete, if that means perfect and without, any flaw or any
Doubt.
Any doubt. Or any questions? Any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have it.
Alan, do you have any thoughts about this?
I would just briefly say, such a beautiful question. I'm just so moved by your honesty and the quest that it reveals, and
Yes.
that I think for each and every person, it would seem that we're questing to strengthen our faith. So to strengthen one's faith, if that's a possibility, and the most seemingly, least externally faithful people talk about strengthening faith daily. It's a daily exercise, daily quest. So if there's something to be strengthened, it's not complete.
Right.
Each day it's growing.
It's
living. May living and growing, may we be successful in finding the way to help others also strengthen their faith.
Emmanuel, my friend, Emmanuel Rosen, fellow Yerushalmi. Alan, Emmanuel, do you have your hand up? You're Emmanuel, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you very much for the great talk. Mikol melamdai hiskalti, I learned from everybody. What would you say is the most important legacy that Professor Wiesel left for us, besides faith and achdus, unity, and joy in life, and against indifference? What would you say if you could tell in one sentence to people for the future to learn from the past?
Well, I think for Professor Wiesel, the key to learning for the sake of the future in the light of what has transpired is memory. Remember that the tashma is also a zachor, the shamor. We're summoned to listen carefully, to remember and to watch over. Professor Wiesel would invoke the phrase from the Talmud, shamor b'dibur echad. Remember and observe were given in one word, as referring to the two accounts of the Ten Commandments. In the one we're told to remember the Sabbath, and the other we're told to observe, or shamor, watch over. Observe it's kind of a weak translation, I think. Shamor is watch over something very precious, dear, fragile, like a child. So yeah, it's in one sentence, it's the phrase from the Baal Shem Tov, and in Souls on Fire, he quotes a teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, where he says, as exile is tied to oblivion or forgetfulness, so is memory tied to redemption. If I believe in the coming of the Messiah, I'm summoned to remember and watch over. Zachor b'shamor. That's where meaning unfolds, seems to me. That's where the future unfolds. Mm-hmm. And just one more line from Professor Wiesel. He says that the future is not the opposite of the past. The opposite of the past is the absence of the future. They're bound together.
Thank you.
Excellent question. Alan, you have thoughts about that?
Again, just briefly, it's a wonderful question that David and I, maybe you yourself, Rabbi Emmanuel, would answer differently on different nights with different focus. But I think one is to be a link in the chain. Professor Wiesel would talk about his decisions, choices, what he did, marrying, having a family, Jewish learning, that so many generations from Avraham Avinu, from patriarch Avraham, Abraham, was not for him to break that chain. So it seems to me that that's, when you're asking in such a sincere, basic way, to strengthen the links in the chain. Yeah. That goes back to Abraham and Sarah. And to be able to give others the wherewithal to do that in their own lives and for the future of Jewish people. So as David Patterson says, we will be able to welcome the Mashiach, welcome the Messiah with everyone in attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a comment from Brenda Marcus in the chat. In the town beyond the wall, Pedro says, to protest against a universe of unhappiness, you had to create happiness.
Yeah, I haven't finished it.
Okay.
My question is,
Go ahead.
I know you create happiness by chesed imabriut, acts of loving kindness. How else can you create happiness?
Through gratitude, with saying, I give thanks to you upon waking each morning. I can tell you one source of, I would say, not just happiness, but profound revelation for myself are the faces of my children and grandchildren, the eyes of my children and grandchildren. And even now, my two children are quite grown, and they have, my wife and I are blessed to have 3 grandchildren, but it's still the joy and the revelation that emanates from those eyes, from those smiles, is enduring. And I'll just relate one brief story. Is 3 days after I defended my dissertation, my first child was born. And I remember looking into those eyes that were 5 seconds old, taking their first look upon this world, and then looking up to discover the creation has been transformed. And suddenly I was a sage. I was like one of the sages in the portraits, because I knew what mattered. I knew what there was to love. I knew what there is to fear. I was, for a moment, I was wise. That's creating happiness. Or happiness is not something we create. Happiness creates us. It's already there. It's already there. It's like the Hasidic saying that in all the world there's only one place where a great treasure is hidden, and that place is the spot where you're standing. It's there. It's sitting in your lap. It's hugging you around the neck. It's like this. It's a moment of realization that Jacob has when he awakes from his dream and says, "God was here all along, and I didn't know it." So happiness is not fabricated. Happiness is revealed. It's realized. I realized that I was always happy, and I didn't know it.
That's true. Thank you.
I think there's in the chapter on Rebbe Uri of Strelitsk, whose chief features were his being in a unparalleled adept at prayer and living with simplicity. So he was visited once by another rabbi who, when looking around, said, well, you really have to bring some better living conditions for your Hasidim. They're underprivileged, as we would say today. And he says, okay, let me show you what they feel about money. So he walked at the end of the prayers that day and said, listen, I have a fortune in my pocket, and any of you is free to come and take whatever you need, whatever you want. Not a single chassid took him up on the option. They had other better things to do. So the mandate of Hasidism is one of your beautiful phrase that the questioner commenter used, to create happiness mandate of creating happiness by also feeling that we feel joy with what we were given and experiencing that directly and fully. There's no lack, no absence.
Yes.
And for Professor Wiesel, as mentioned, I think happiness, create happiness, have a classroom of students, or the Kaufman Hall at the 92nd Street Y, filled with 973 people in each and every seat, and learning together for an hour, hour and a half. That's happiness. That's why those books are called Celebration.
Yeah.
Study, especially study of Jewish text, Jewish tradition of the Torah. Nothing could provide greater joy, greater happiness. To be disturbed again and again, to reconcile again and again, to go further each and every day, strengthen faith, help others do that.
To begin again and again.
Always.
To begin again.
As he glosses Rabbi Tarfon's famous injunction, it's not up to us to complete the work, but we should not desist from it. And he glosses the desist from it, leaving off from it, as to begin again and again and again.
Yes. Let me ask, how are we, Stan, Rabbi, how are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more quick question?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And one more, about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, good. So yes, wait.
Wow.
10, maybe even 15. Okay.
Ooh, look at that.
So
We keep there's the increase, strengthening
Yes.
with each and every minute. Good.
Chazak, yes. And we
Yes.
question from Les and Jean Schechter in the chat where it says Wiesel's world was one of global conflict. Do you think his writings were influenced by an attempt to understand it or to escape from it? Alan, what do you think?
Well, it's so beautiful. That question really takes us into a broadened realm. So beautiful to put a global stage there, where this is a synagogue study, and we've been focusing on Torah. So it's great to be able to move the classroom into the world. And for Professor Wiesel, I think you're right, that global conflict was all too present. And he was certainly influenced by it, meaning global conflict took from him his father, his mother, sister, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, a city. So the influence was just, unfortunately, tragic and palpable. I would have to say, with each and every breath.
Well, he certainly didn't try to escape it. In fact, Alan, you told me not long ago a profound story about Professor Wiesel's journey to Cambodia.
Yeah.
And the killing fields, and he would go wherever there was conflict. He would say, "Here I am." He would be present.
Yes, and that's part that can be read that can be listened to in one of the lectures at the 92nd Street Y, where he recounts his journey to Cambodia, which coincided with his father's yahrzeit, the anniversary of his father's passing on the 18th day of Shvat. And so he was determined but hard-pressed to bring together a prayer quorum, a minyan. And so, but he did. He did on the killing fields. And as he tells, as he recounts, he said he was leading the prayers with his Vishnitz Nusach. And he said Kaddish at the end for the mourner's Kaddish for the orphan, those who were commemorating the yahrzeit. Someone else was saying Kaddish there too, a younger man. So after they finished, Professor Wiesel walked up, said to him, "You're saying Kaddish for your father?" "No." "Your mother?" "No." "For who?" And the young man raises his hand, points to the killing fields, says, "For them." Which means that every aspect of Jewish living, mourning, tradition was brought there with him to Cambodia. It was not something he left in his suitcase, not something that was left in the lecture hall at the 92nd Street Y, or in his study at Boston University, or in Paris, or in Jerusalem, or at the yeshiva he built in his father's memory in Jerusalem, in Kiryat Ungvar. It was not left there. He took each and every item of that tradition into the world in order to try to sculpt the world into a place worthy of godliness. And so he, with the prize money from the Nobel Peace Prize, one of the great commitments that he made was a series of conferences called Against Hatred, which convened in Moscow, in New York, in Boston, in Jerusalem, a number of other places. So it was, as David has rightly and richly said, and as his book on the portraits points out, with each of these masters that Professor Wiesel chose to bring into our midst, to enlarge, to take us, to engage with and model for us. Each one was determined in a similar way to weed out hatred and to bring love. At the end of the last essay Filled with Fire and Light is on Reb Uri of Strelitsk, and almost echoing Reb Emanuel's question. He says about Reb Uri of Strelitsk, what was the greatness and holiness of the Seraph of Strelitsk? He knew how to reconcile his love of God and his love for his fellow human beings. He remained faithful to both, but never at the expense of one or the other. To an opponent of Hasidism who had criticized the Saraf, a great rabbi remarked, "You criticize him for not being sufficiently erudite? Well, I want you to know that there are all kinds of geniuses among rabbis. There are those whose specialty is the area of what is pure and what is impure, others who know everything about the laws of marriage and divorce, and others who are teachers in the field of business transactions. The Seraph of Strelitsk is a genius in the domain of Yiras Shamayim and Avas Hashem, the fear of God and the love of God. But how, you may ask, is one to teach these essential virtues? The son of his successor, Rabbi Avraham ben Rabbi Yehuda Tzvi, was asked this question. Yiras Shamayim, fear of God, is something I cannot teach you, he replied, but I can teach you love of God. And what is love of God, he was asked. Oh, he sighed, it is love for our fellow human beings. I know, says Professor Wiesel here after closing those quotations. I know you may say, that's all. It's so easy. Easy? Did you say easy? Then why not try it? That's the concluding words of the lecture, and what I felt to be really the concluding words of the book, and a way to respond to this great question about global conflict. That every incident of global conflict has a human face. And that's what Professor Wiesel saw, equipped with the guidance of Rebbe Uri of Strelitsk, of the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, of the whole armada of great Jewish figures.
Beautifully and profoundly said, Alan, my friend, my teacher.
Chavrusa.
And I think those words might be suitable to close this session. Stan or Rabbi Cohen, do you have some parting thoughts and words? I know you do.
Rabbi Cohen, please unmute.
Unmute. I did. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Rosen, you mentioned Moshe Chaim Berkowitz before.
Yes.
Who was a dear friend of Elie Wiesel. And
yes.
in 1972, I knew Moshe Chaim Berkowitz very, very well. And he was honored with the Keter Shem Tov award by the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations, by the OU in New York. And I flew into New York, and the guest speaker, of course, was Elie Wiesel. Of course, the speech was unbelievable, but was really unbelievable was he ended it with the singing of Ani Mami. There were 2,000 people in the room, and you couldn't hear a pin drop. There was a moment of holiness I will never forget, really. It was a moment of holiness.
So beautiful.
Really. Let me just say a hearty yeshikoach to you, Dr. Rosen, and Dr. David Patterson, certainly two great scholars and teachers, for a magnificent, enlightening presentation and teaching, and for sharing of your vast knowledge with us. As we say in Hebrew, "Anachnu me'achalim lachem," we wish you that you should be able to continue in this avodat hakodesh, really spreading this labor, this holy love, for many years to come. Many years to come. Sacred service, avodat hakodesh. This is truly a sacred service. So God bless you and thank you, Yeshikoach, to both of you again and again. I forgot to mention, and let me do this now, that We are proud to present this program in conjunction with our community partners, the Ackerman Center for Holocaust Studies at the University of Texas in Dallas, and the Institute for Global Study of Antisemitism and the Policy. We are truly proud and privileged to partner together with you. Please join us next week, next Sunday, for the second presentation. We will be privileged to hear from Avi Melamed, who is the founder of Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspective. Topic will be Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. Once again, do yourselves a favor, do everyone a favor, and please join with us. God bless you all for being here today, and may we see each other, as we say, of Simchas.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for all our friends.